Chuck, I am so excited to have you on this morning and thank you for taking the time. I know you were out in the woods working. You're going to go back out in the woods after this. So we really appreciate you doing this for the listeners because you have such a fascinating story. And I really want people to hear that story.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be with you again, Aaron. It's been a moon or two. I think we figured 7 or 8 years ago I did this podcast with you. So it's a joy and an honor to be back with you.
That's right. Well, I appreciate that. And yes, and a shout out to our mutual friend, Bob Pearson, who helped reconnect us. Speaking of, I do want to start with something that I know is a passion of yours. It's a passion of Bob's and mine. I like to start with people's origin story. And this goes back to, not your 3 or 4 years old, but your 13-year-old self. You had a chance to see this guy named Ray Charles, which I am so jealous of because what an amazing performer. So in concert, you had this epiphany and it's impacted the rest of your life. Let's talk a little bit about that performance and how it inspired you.
Absolutely. At the time, yes, I must have been 13 years old, and I had already started playing music, dabbling with the piano and dabbling with the guitar a little bit. And I was about to form my first band, the Misfits, but we weren't quite there yet. So at this juncture, my sister Judy has a date to go see Ray Charles at the Coliseum in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I grew up. And my parents had an appointment that same day, and so they didn't want to just leave me alone. And they asked my sister Judy if she would take me along. Well, she graciously accepted. I'm not sure she was happy about it, but she accepted, and I went with her and her date to see Ray, and it was just mind-boggling, Aaron. It really was. I mean, Ray is Ray, of course, and he was the headliner, and he was the main focus. But it wasn't just Ray. It was the Raylettes singing. It was Fathead Newman on saxophone. It was Billy Preston on organ at the time.
Really? Wow, that's amazing.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize that he played with Ray.
He did. He would have been very young, of course, at the time, and Ray gave him a special spot to come out front and sing a song and dance. I remember him dancing. I've never seen Billy do that, but he did it, and he did it very well. So, as you say, it was definitely an epiphany for me when I left there. It was like, man, if I could ever, not necessarily be in a band exactly like that, but if I could ever be in a band that would move people the way that just moved me, that would be a goal. So that's been my goal ever since.
Well, it's a great segue to the next question, and I almost can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth. So, some people would be lucky to have the opportunity to play for one band, right? Like the Ray Charles's band. You have played in the likes, you played with Eric Clapton, you played and are playing, I think, still with the Rolling Stones,
Yes.
John Mayer, Black Crowes, George Harrison, the Allman Brothers Band, Indigo Girls, Blues Traveler, Train, Montgomery Gentry, and Leanne Womack. And I don't even think that's all of them. Those are what's listed on your site. So, first of all, wow. And then I do have to ask, because we know that you have a preference for the Stones since you've been with them for a while. Which band have you most enjoyed playing with?
Well, it's hard to beat the Rolling Stones, Aaron. I mean, really, it's the Rolling Stones. I grew up listening, like many of us did, to that music. And in my first band, as I mentioned earlier, the Misfits, we played YMCA every Friday night. We were learning the hits of the day, and of course, this was during the British invasion era. And while we certainly had indigenous music as well, some country and some soul and R&B and kind of songs like that, but we also had British invasion. So I remember. I think the first guitar lick I ever learned was "The Last Time," the riff on "The Last Time" that the Stones did. And so it was a dream come true, man, to get the call for that, and it's still a dream come true for me.
Well, in addition to that, and I think I knew this before, but you actually had a chance to play with the Allman Brothers back in 1972. This is before they had, obviously they've had some tragedies, but that's kind of like the OG. I think they started in 69. So that must have been a pretty cool experience.
Well, it certainly was, and I'll try to give you the short version of how that came about. Basically, at a point in time, I was asked to play on Greg Allman's first solo album, which was called Laid Back. The band had toured as a 5-piece band without a replacement for Dwayne, which put a lot of pressure on Dickie Betts, as you can imagine. Dickie had never played slide guitar, and he had to learn all those Dwayne Allman slide licks and all that. But they came back from that tour, the 5-piece tour, mentally, physically exhausted, needing a break, taking a break. Greg had some songs he didn't feel fit the Allman Brothers, so he wanted to do a solo record. I got called in. So we start the process. It's going great. Songs are really cool. A nice set of musicians. After a couple of weeks or so, these jam sessions started occurring, and the rest of the Allman Brothers band would come down. So Dickie and J-Mo and Butch Trucks and Barry Oakley, who was still alive, playing bass with the band. And we would just play an Allman song or play a blues song or just pick a key and go. And after a bit of time, I'd say a couple of weeks or so of this, I get a message from their manager, Phil Walden, who was also the founder of the record company. And he said, I want to see you in my office. And now I'm 20 years old, right? And I've moved my way up the ladder a little bit of Capricorn, playing with various different groups and artists. And I thought, well, what the hell did I do wrong?
I was going to say you get called into the principal's office.
You know, exactly. That's what it felt like, you know. And so I went in with that in mind. And there's all the guys in the Allman Brothers in the room, and some pleasantries went down, and then the shoe dropped. You know, Phil actually was the one who said it. He said, "Listen, the guys feel like this is going in a really interesting direction, and there's going to be another Allman Brothers album when we finish with Greg's, and the guys would like you to be on it and would like you to be in the band."
That's incredible.
After they picked me up off the floor, I said, "When do we start?"
I mean, that's incredible, Chuck. Thank you for sharing that story. And I do, related to that, I just want to know, because I think right now you are currently credited as the keyboardist and musical director of the Rolling Stones. I got a chance to see you guys at Levi's Stadium when you were last through. And it's funny because at one point I realized, I was like, oh, that's right. Chuck plays in the band, and I got to interview him. It was very cool. What's it like spending time with Mick and Keith and Ronnie? And I know Charlie obviously is no longer with us, but that must have been like an incredible experience, because you were with them, I think, mostly on versus off since 1983, if my research serves correct.
82, actually. That
82.
was the European tour behind the Tattoo You record at the time. And, you know, man, everything that you could imagine that it's like, that's what it's like. It's so fun. The guys are fantastic, you know, great senses of humor all the way around. You know, that sometimes it's that dry British wit, and sometimes it's just out and out fun, you know, jokes going around all the time. But what's fascinating to me is the work ethic. You know, these guys, ever since they formed in, what was it, 62, they have been determined to be, in the beginning, it was to be the best blues band in London, and then the best blues band in Britain, and then the best blues band in Europe and the rest of the world. And then they started writing songs, and it just went on from there. But really, the work ethic is unbelievable. When we're rehearsing, the guys hunker down. You know, it's intense. It's fun. You know, it's a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, I tell people that's my most enjoyable time is the rehearsals, because we wind up experimenting with songs that are deep in the catalog and that we know probably won't make it to the stage, but we do it just as an exercise, you know, just to say we can do this. And so there's been hundreds of songs that we've gone through in those rehearsals, and it's so fun. But the traveling with the guys, you know, it's amazing. Of course, it's all first class, and the accommodations are beautiful. They treat us all very well. It's a huge organization, as you know. You can imagine the entourage by the time you incorporate the band, the staff, the security, the management, the record company occasionally, the crew. You know, it's unbelievable. I mean, it depends on the tour. You know, in the heyday of doing this, I guess, in the Steel Wheels and Voodoo Lounge era, when we were doing, say, 110 shows a year, something like that, there was probably 250 or so people working. And that doesn't count the local, you know, people in the stadiums and that kind of thing. But again, just going back to the heart of it, it's the work ethic. They love what they do. They're so good at it. They're still writing songs. They've been in the studio recently, and there'll be another new record coming out.
Great.
And Hackney Diamonds, as you know, was the most recent that we toured with behind the show that you saw in Leavell Stadium. But it's a hoot. And yes, we miss Charlie. Steve Jordan is amazing, and thank heavens that he's the guy that is filling the bill, filling the shoes. But Charlie was such a unique character, and we all certainly miss him, and such a great drummer.
Yeah, well, and that chemistry, right, of being with the band for whatever it was, the better part of 50 plus years is just, I'm sure, irreplaceable. I appreciate you sharing that story. I have one more music story, and then we're going to get into your books and
Yeah.
your conservationism. I mentioned this to you when I sent over the question. So I was at my friend Paolo and Suzanne's house. This is several years back, and he has music on in the background. He's a huge music buff. He went to the Rolling Stones show with me, and we're watching David Gilmour's live, Pink Floyd live in Pompeii. And I'm watching, and then all of a sudden they zoom in on this guy singing Comfortably Numb, and I almost spit my drink out, and I yelled to them. I was like, hey, I interviewed that guy back at South by Southwest, a few years back. So tell me a little bit about, like, obviously you're with this one amazing band in the Rolling Stones, and you have that duration, and then you're playing with this other amazing band, or at least David Gilmour and some of the members of Pink Floyd. Like, that must have been a wow moment for you.
Well, it was. It certainly was. The background is that I think it was 86, if I'm correct. I was musical director on an event called Guitar Greats, which was a live broadcast during the MTV era. And this was at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey. And so the guitar players involved were included Tony Iommi, Lita
But yeah.
Ford, Link Ray, Dave Edmunds, Dickie Betts, David Gilmour, Neil Sean, and there may have been another one or two, I forget. But it was one of these things where each guy got two, or girl, in case of Lita, got two songs, right? And so we were the band that backed everybody up. And so, David was on it. We did his two songs, and it worked out pretty well. But that was it. Okay, we finished the gig. Years go by, maybe 10 years or so, and I'm rehearsing in London with the Eric Clapton band backing up George Harrison. We did the George Harrison tour of Japan, the last tour that he did. And Gilmour comes in and hangs out and listens, and then invites some of us to his house, which was really more like a castle. And a beautiful place. And we sipped some wine and had some nice conversation. And that was it. So another, I don't know, 8, 10 years go by. My wife is checking the guest book of our website, and she said, there's a guy here that says he's David Gilmour, Chuck. And the message was, hi, Chuck, David Gilmour here, ... honest. And he left a phone number and an email, and I was skeptical. I thought, why, somebody's posing, right? But I said the email. I'll do the email. It seemed a little safer somehow. I don't know. And he responded immediately. Within a couple of days, we had a conversation, and he said, hey, man, I've been thinking about you. I want to shake my band up a little bit, and if you're available, I'm doing a European tour. Can you make it? And oh, hell yeah. And it was in between tours with the Stones, so it was perfect.
That's unbelievable. And I mean, what a funny story that he reached out to you through the guest book, and your wife was the one that flagged that for you. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's very cool. I did mention you've written a few books. And so your first, I believe, was called Forever Green, The History and Hope of the American Forest.
Yeah.
Followed by your autobiography, which, by the way, is credited as or claimed as one of the best rock autobiographies ever, which just hearing a little bit of your story here, Chuck, I can see why. Which of those was the harder of the two to write?
Well, I think probably the forestry book, because I was really just getting into learning about forestry, the aspects of forestry. And basically the reason I wrote it is because, Rose Lane inherited some property. The background is that from her grandmother, and we converted what was a diversified farm into forest land. And as time went on, as I studied forestry and got more and more confident in managing our forest lands, and I would travel around, I would meet people that would say things like, oh, you're into forestry. Well, that's cool, but isn't it terrible what's happening to our trees? Well, what do you mean? Oh, they're just cutting them down. Every time I would go by these places and I see that it looks like a bomb went off, there's just no trees there left. Well, did you go there a couple of years after and see that they had replanted those trees? And by the way, do you know that those trees that they took off the landscape there went to make somebody's first home or maybe renovated someone else's home? And do you like to read books and magazines and newspapers? So I realized that there was a lot of misconception about the practice of forestry. So I wanted to get the truth out there, and that's why I wrote the book. And yes, there was a time when America did abuse her forests, especially in the days of the timber barons in the mid to late 1800s and maybe even before that. But around the turn of the century of the early 90s, you had characters like Theodore Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, Carl Schenck, who started the first school of forestry in America around the North Carolina area. Other characters, John Muir, a great environmentalist, come together and say, wait a minute, we can't just cut and run. We've got to manage. And so the practice changed. And then it became a matter of, okay, select cutting a lot of times. And if you do have a clear cut, certainly replant, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the purpose for the book. And hopefully we accomplished that. But it was diving deep into the research, Aaron. That's the difficult part, was trying to get it all right, get the facts correct, and then trying to explain to the public how we operate today as managers of our forest land.
Well, I love that pragmatic approach because I think a lot of people are cut them all down and, it's good because it helps the economy, or don't cut any of them down, right? So I liked that backstory. And we'll get a little bit more into your tree farm in a sec. And if I didn't mention it, by the way, your autobiography, which I am 100% going to read, is called Between Rock and a Home Place, which I love to play on words. You wrote a couple of other books. One was a children's book, and it was called The Tree Farmer. And then most recently, you penned one, and I think based on what you just said, people will get it. Growing a Better America, Smart, Strong, Sustainable. And I think that last word, sustainable, is such a critical element of it. So, one, I'd love to find out how you find time to be a tree farmer, write books. You're also a world-class musician. So, how do you balance that? And then let's talk a little bit about, do you have another book in you? Because I think people would probably love for you to continue that trend.
Well, yeah, I think time management is really a thing. It can be done. And if you structure your days in a way that you try to meet the goals that you have set for yourself. And obviously, if I'm out on tour with the Stones or with somebody, or engaged in a recording session for an album or something like that, that's going to be my focus. But there's time in between those tours. There was time for me to learn about forestry, and to also to experiment with the writing, the aspect, and trying to get the language right. And I have to admit, I've had help in that regard as well. I'm not a wordsmith. I'm actually a high school dropout. I
You
was
ended
never
up
that.
okay, Chuck.
But yes, and I enjoyed the process of writing and of structuring the book, arranging the chapters into this, that, and the other, whether it was the autobiography or Growing a Better America or Forever Green. Let's talk about the children's book just a moment. I did that immediately after the Forever Green book, because I realized in these travels and what I described to you earlier about the misconceptions, along the way, I figured, hey, it's so important to get this information to young people at the earliest possible age. So bring the outdoors into the classroom. And that was one of the reasons for writing that book. And the theme of the book is a little boy who visits his grandfather's tree farm and doesn't know what a tree farm is and what kind of trees. I hope they're not figs. But along the way, the grandfather explains that, this tree might go to make an infant's first bed, kind of thing. And these trees are going to go to build the parents' first home before they even have the child, that kind of thing. So it was a fun book to write, and it's done well. It's made its way into a lot of libraries and schools across the country, which is very gratifying. And then the sustainable, the Growing a Better America book is kind of based on the premise that, hey, we've got, I forget the figure now, but it must be 360 or so million people in the country now, and we've grown exponentially since the founding of America, and we're going to continue to grow. But let's be careful about how we grow. Let's just don't do it willy-nilly. Can we do it smart, strong, and sustainable? And so we go into aspects of how we might be able to do that.
Well, it's great. And
And you asked, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no,
you
that's okay.
asked, is there another book?
Yes, that's the key question.
And the answer is, Between Rock and a Home Place is quite old now. I was 50 years old when it came out. And that was one of the reasons I kind of thought the age of 50 was kind of a good point to look back and say, this is how much fun I've had. But that was 23 years ago.
I was going to say 5 years ago because you look so great, but
Oh, bless you. No, but so I have a working title that I think is kind of fun. My Life as a Tree Farmer and Other Rock and Roll Experiences.
I love it. Well, I will be the first one in line to buy it when you update that and you come out with a new version. So thank you for that. So you alluded to this, and I want to get back to the tree farm. And by the way, I believe the name of the farm is the Charlene Woodlands and Preserve. And you
Yes.
mentioned your wife. And so the history there, by the way, this is where everyone will get a chuckle out of this. As I'm doing my prep work, I try to go deep and I'm looking at this history on the page. And one of the comments, and I couldn't tell, turned out to be his wife, not him. It mentioned that he always dreamed of having a life in fashion. I was like, wow, that's a little bit of a disjointed, vision in my mind. And I sent the questions over to Chuck, and Chuck's like, yeah, I don't know where that one came from. I was like, oh, well, this is where I found it. But anyway, we did figure out that it was his wife, Rose Lane. So thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying. Let's talk a little bit about how this work as a tree farmer and conservationist came about. Obviously, we know the backstory and the music, and maybe give us a little bit more on this 29-acre. I think that's how big it is. Tree farm in Macon, Georgia.
Well, it's grown from the original 1,100 acres now to about 3,800 acres.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, that's
and
amazing.
and it's such a joy to work on this place and to engage in forestry. And it's not just forestry; it's environmentalism. It's not just the trees in the forest; it's the flora and fauna within. It's the other things that trees do for us, like clean air, clean water, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, my wife inherited 1,100 acres from her grandmother back in 1981. As I mentioned earlier, it was a diversified farm. I started studying on the options. I mean, we're here in Georgia, so peach trees, pecan trees are a big deal. We looked at nursery stock. There was row crops here on this place. There was cattle. I realized pretty quickly row crops day to day, a lot of day to day, cattle the same, and the other options would be like starting from scratch. You have to plant those pecan trees or plant those peach trees, and Georgia crops are pretty famous. Georgia's pretty famous for those crops. But along the way, my brother-in-law at a breakfast table said, well, Chuck, there's a 50-acre field up here, and if you're not going to plant a crop on it like we usually do, you might consider just putting trees on it. Okay, well, that's not a lot of day-to-day. Put the trees in the ground. They grow over time. A good thing for people, a good thing for the environment. But really what the light bulb said was, Chuck, where does that thing that's given you so much joy and such a great career come from? The instrument of the piano is mostly of wood. So many other musical instruments are made from or have some element of wood in them. And I thought, well, that's a way to give back. I mean, not that I would be growing trees for that purpose, right? But it would still be a way of giving back to what has given me so much. So that was really what triggered everything. And that's what triggered me studying. I eventually enrolled in a correspondence course on forestry, which was a nice little course. Now, granted, it's not like going to a 4-year college and getting that degree, but it was still pretty comprehensive, and it gave me a lot of confidence and knowledge of how to go forward. And I'm still a student, Aaron.
Well, you strike me as still a student, and I have to say two things. One, flora fauna, that's like one of my favorite word or two words. So thank you for sharing that. And it does feel like you are a student, and I love that you've brought your two passions. Well, there's a third passion, which we'll get to in a minute, but I love that you brought those two together and, the woods and the wood being part of the instruments and just how connected those are. I do want to go one step further in your conservation efforts. And this is how I think I first met you through Bob Pearson. So you and a guy named Joel Babbitt founded something called the Mother Nature Network back in 2009. Can you share a little bit more about the decision to build what turned out to be the most visited independent environmental website in the world, according to what I looked up?
Well, I have to credit Joel for that, Aaron. It was really his idea. You know, Joel has been in the advertising business on a very high level for a long, long time and all throughout his career. And he called me up one day and he said, "Come to my office. I want to show you something." And so I went to his office and he said, "You know, everybody's talking about the environment now. Everybody wants to be quote unquote green." This was back in, as you say, 2009. And he said, you know, and the internet is exploding at that time, as we know. And I've been scouring the internet and I find these little mom and pop type websites about the environment. And there's governmental sites that are very technical, but I can't find anything that's sort of like for every man, you know,
Hmm.
for everyone to understand and to go deep into all these different issues concerning the environment that people are talking about. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, you're right." He said, "Well, listen, I think I could get the funding and I think I could get the staff if you will come in with me and co-found this concept." So I did, and we put it together and we ran it for 10 years. It was such a joy. I loved every minute of it. We had a great group of folks that were very concerned about environmental issues, very talented journalists. And we had some, I think, very good technical aspects of the website, the videos that we did. I used to have
Hmm.
a little thing called In the Green Room,
Hmm.
which was a short 5 to 7 minute video of me talking to people like Chevy Chase, his wife Judy, I think it is, school greening of schools, and Usher. I remember interviewing
Oh yeah,
Usher.
that's cool.
So we loved it, and finally somebody wanted it worse than we did, and we sold the company to a company called Dot Dash that now runs it. We actually own two properties. It was the Mother Nature Network, which was mnn.com. And then we also bought the Tree Hugger site from Discovery. And so when we sold both of those to the Dot Dash company. And so they dropped the M and N, which I thought was a mistake personally. But you can still go to treehugger.com.
Well, that's great that you did this and put something so special out into the world. And I see that you're credited as being involved as the director of environmental affairs. Do you still do anything in that regard, or is that just more of a in title only?
Well, I stayed on with Dot Dash for a year as a consultant, and then we just kind of parted ways. They were going in a direction I felt like, you know, some of the things we were doing were better than what they were doing, but they had their own ideas and they owned it. So graciously said, "Hey, that's cool. You guys run it. We'll go on to other things." But of course, I'm still involved in environmental issues and give speeches and presentations from time to time concerning those subjects. And I have a lot of fun doing that.
Well, that part is awesome, and I do want to ask a question in a minute about how people can get involved. But first, there was something as I was reading about you, and now that I'm talking to you again, I am 0% surprised. But you're on the record as saying you have three real passions in life: your family, your trees, and your music. Obviously, we've talked about the trees and your music, and we mentioned your lovely wife. Let's talk a little bit more about what family means to you.
Yeah, everything. You know, Rosie and I have been married going on 53 years now, which is a good thing. And I'm not afraid or to share with you now. It's been some time. It's been going on 6 years now that Rose Lane has Alzheimer's.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, it's been a tough journey, as many of your listeners out there, I'm sure, have had experiences with a loved one or a friend that has this disease, and it's tough, you know. But there is no option except to go forward. Rose Lane is happy; she's comfortable in familiar surroundings here at home. We have excellent care. You know, she's sometimes still with us and sometimes not, but the love persists and the family together persists. We have two daughters grown now. They have beautiful careers of their own, but, you know, not just the immediate family, but extended family. You know, Rose Lane's family lives around this area in Twiggs County, Georgia, and so very close to all of her family members that are still with us. My sister Judy, that I mentioned earlier about the Ray Charles, she loves to travel. She and her husband are, I think, in Bosnia or somewhere right now. This is what they do. They sold everything they had, right? House, car, belongings, and just travel. And they've been to every country you can imagine. It's fantastic. And I love that she does that. And she has a little blog called Losing Sight of the Shore. And so we get information about their adventures, and that's fun. My brother, Billy, who is 14 years my elder and who was born deaf, Aaron, my mother had German measles when he was born. And so he's, had an incredible career as a minister. He is a preacher for the Church of Christ, the deaf congregation in Memphis, Tennessee. He used to evangelize all across the world. He's been to Africa and to all parts of Europe and everything in his career. He's a little beyond the age of travel now, so he doesn't do it, but he still looks after his congregation. So family is everything to me.
Well, that's very clear. So let me start by saying I really appreciate you sharing your story about your wife. Unfortunately, we don't know whether it was Alzheimer's or dementia, but my grandmother and father both suffered from that. So I know just how hard it can be. But I love that, as you said, she's comfortable and surrounded by the right support. It's funny. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Coda, but it strikes me as so funny. The premise, for those that haven't, is it's a daughter who's a sort of musical genius, and she has deaf parents and a deaf brother, and they can't hear her, right? But obviously, and they have no idea whether she's good or she's not. Turns out she's good. So just thinking about your brother Billy and like how what an interesting juxtaposition that is of him going on and being this very, successful deaf minister and you being a world-class musician. And so must have been an interesting journey for your parents growing up. I do want to give you an opportunity, two things. So I like to ask guests, where would you like people to connect with you or get involved in your philanthropic endeavors? And then the second, it's a more pragmatic one, but what is one thing our listeners can start doing immediately that will have a positive impact on the planet?
Well, to the latter question first, the old saying about how do you eat an elephant? One bite at the time, right?
That's right.
So, when you're out and about and you see trash on the ground, pick it up. Pick it up, man, stash it in the trash can somewhere nearby. To go a little further, I like the idea of communities coming together for these issues. You can have a community green space and where everybody, maybe a community garden where everybody shares and the bounty of the garden as well as the work of the garden, which is kind of fun anyway. Promote your state or county or local green spaces. And kids, make sure that children get out of that classroom, that they put the dadgum things down, these personal devices that we all have now, and the screen time. Shut that off for a while and get them in the woods. What was the term that one of the great writers came up with is outdoor deficit disorder, So get the kids outdoors, get outside yourself. Exercise is a great thing. Go in the park. You got parks all across America. Go take a walk in that park. Enjoy the outdoors and enjoy the green spaces, but promote those things. And make sure that development, in the book, Growing a Better America, make sure that when you see developments or you hear about a development in your community, go to those meetings and throw your hand up and say, hey, have you thought about a green space? Have you thought about putting a park? Is there a possibility of having a pond somewhere where we can all enjoy walking around the pond kind of thing? So just get involved, really, is the basic idea. And then to connect with me or some of the things that you and I have discussed, certainly my website is just myname.com, Chuck Leavell, Leavell.com. You can see where I'm playing or if the Stones have a tour, where we're going and that kind of thing, or any projects that I've got going on. But also, since we've talked about some of these causes, Alzheimer's, my dad passed away many years ago when I was 17 of lung cancer. So Cancer Society is a great place to put some contributions. Alzheimer's funds are a great place to put some contributions. Environmental causes, all of those things. And these are normal processes that people can do, but I think they're very, very important, especially now, Aaron, at this age where cutting everything, cutting public programs, cutting environmental programs, cutting school programs, cutting medical programs. We need people to step up and do what we can with less.
Well, those are all really prescriptive, so thank you for sharing that, and I love that it's as simple as going out and picking up the trash or, like, getting your kids out into the fresh air. I was just at Yellowstone a few weekends ago,
Oh, yeah.
and my friends from Hiking My Feelings led a tour along with Yellowstone Forever, and there's no substitute to seeing that flora and fauna, the 2 words that you used earlier, and
We
just
got it
breathing in fresh
again.
air and having no connectivity to you held up your smartphone. So thank you for all of that. And we will put some of those links in our show notes so people can go, and we'll direct them to your site and to the a couple of the sites that they can donate to. We have a few quick rapid fire questions. Most of them are pretty light. One of them I'm really interested in getting your take, since you probably played in a lot of these bands that most people want to go see. But any particular book, podcast, or streaming show that you are loving right now?
Ooh, there's a great book on Leon Russell by Jim Jaworowitz. I love that book. I love Leon Russell. He was one of my heroes, such a multi-talented guy, enigmatic figure, mysterious, all of those things rolled up, had an incredible career. So read that Leon book.
Okay, we'll link to that one. So thank you for sharing that wisdom. This one I'm also really, because you met everyone, including David Gilmour, after he put his name and phone number and email in your guest book. You've had a chance to meet a lot of amazing people. Who has impressed you the most?
David was certainly impressive. A lot of people don't realize he has a multitude of skills. He was a very accomplished pilot,
Oh,
and he
really?
used to own a fleet of like World War II planes that he flew just for fun. David is, and then he's so knowledgeable in so many different subjects. We were having a conversation one day, and we got into truffles, and he starts rattling off, where you get these truffle, the difference in this truffle and that truffle, the difference from Italy and France and all that. What? How do you know this? So I find him to be an intellectual, of course, a great, great musician, but also a lot of fun to be with.
Well, it's good to know. It's you never know with people like that, and you shared about the boys and Rolling Stones, and I'm not surprised to hear like how hard a worker they are, and just but knowing that
Yeah.
David is smart and fun and multidimensional is really
Yeah.
cool. Two more quick ones, and this one's a
All
little bit
right.
of a tougher one, but biggest
Ooh.
regret.
Biggest regret, not reading music, I think. I learned piano basically from my mom. She was not a teacher or a professional, but she could play. And so I learned basically by ear. When I got a little older, I did wind up playing tuba in junior high school. And that gave me the ability to read the bass clef, only the bass clef, right? But I think if I'd have had some degree of education in reading music, because classical music, some jazz music requires that. And to be able to just incorporate that, not that you want to just go that direction and play only those kinds of music, but I think it could have enhanced some of my technique. And that's not a huge regret, Aaron, because I guess I've made out okay in the long run. But I think if I had to do it all over, I would have tried to hunker down and study a little bit.
Well, it is an interesting one because, again, you've done okay in the long run, and I think if anyone listens to you, they're like, "Wow, Chuck is a magician on the keyboard." So, but we do appreciate sharing that. And I realized after the fact I should have asked this one differently, and I'm going to leave the door open if you want to answer it differently. So, I asked my guests, name one band or artist you wish you had seen in concert. But given the fact that you literally have played with everyone, you can answer that. Or is there a band that you wish you had played with that maybe you didn't get a chance to, or maybe you'd like to play with in the future? And like Usher, or one of these folks that's a very different musical style from you.
Well, actually, that's a pretty easy one for me, Aaron. Otis Redding.
Otis Redding. I
Otis
love that.
Redding. I never got to see Otis, but I listen to him all the time on those great records. I've seen some of the film where he performed, and they recorded that on film, which is amazing. His energy level, and God, what a great voice. As a songwriter, so amazing. So would I have accepted an invitation to play in Otis's band? Whoo, Lord, yes.
That would be a good one. That's a great way to end things, and I love that that's your choice. That makes so much sense. Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time from, being away from the forest and your wife. I encourage people to go watch the YouTube version of it. We distribute this mostly the audio version, but you can see Chuck's beautiful home in the background, and he just has such a great energy and a smile on his face. So, Chuck, thank you for taking the time today.
A real joy, Aaron. It's great to be with you again. And one thing we didn't cover, but I would love for people to know about, is my documentary, which is called Chuck Leavell, The Tree Man, available on Amazon, and also the television program that we've been doing, which is called America's Forests, which is available also on Amazon, but you'll see it on some PBS networks as well.
Well, that's awesome, and I'm glad we got that plug in because half the time I'll be done with the guests and they're like, "Oh shoot, I forgot to mention this." So we snuck it in under the wire, and I will also make sure we have links to those. So, Chuck, thanks again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.